What is a bypass trust and what is it used for? In California, we use bypass trusts primarily to protect from estate taxes, but also to control assets after a deceased spouse's death so that there's something left over and protected for that spouse's children. At one time, bypass trusts were used quite often because the estate tax exclusion amount was only $600,000. So if you had an estate in excess of that, you would be subject to estate tax, and a bypass trust was a very effective tool to segregate out the deceased spouse's share of the estate so it wouldn't be subject to estate tax. Now the estate tax limit is so high that a vast majority of estates simply aren't subject to estate tax, so the tax reasons for doing a bypass trust are no longer there. However, there's also a control aspect of bypass trusts. So if you have a married couple and they have children from prior marriages, by creating a bypass trust, it can segregate out and preserve and protect the deceased spouse's share of the estate so that it can ultimately go to that spouse's children after the surviving spouse's death. There's a number of problems, however, with bypass trusts. First of all, their funding is usually mandatory, and the surviving spouse may not know that or understand that or even want to follow through with that. So once one spouse dies, the survivor has to take half of the community and all of that spouse's separate property and put it into a separate trust, the bypass trust. If that segregation doesn't occur, it can always happen later, or it can even be enforced after the surviving spouse's death, but it obviously creates a lot of problems and a lot of argument and a lot of complications. The other problem with bypass trusts is they typically allow the surviving spouse to get assets for things like health, support, maintenance, and education. But there can be arguments over whether or not the surviving spouse needs distributions from the bypass trust for those purposes. So if you have a surviving spouse and you have children of the deceased spouse and they don't get along, there can be a lot of argument over the proper distribution from a bypass trust during the surviving spouse's lifetime. The primary benefit of a bypass trust in today's age, with our estate tax exclusions so high, is that it protects the assets for the deceased spouse's children. But you have to understand the complications that you're getting into, and you really have to understand who is going to be the trustee of the bypass trust, what is the distribution requirement going to be to the surviving spouse, and how do you design that so hopefully you can reduce any friction between the surviving spouse and the children of the deceased spouse when the time comes.